morning. At this time, can the host please start the webinar? Good morning and welcome to the New York City Council hearing of the Committee on Fire and Emergency Management. At this time, can everyone please silence your cell phones? If you wish to testify today, please come up to the sergeant's desk so you can fill out one of these witness slips. Written testimony can be emailed to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that is testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. Chair, we are ready to begin.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Councilmember Joanne Ariola, Chair to the Committee on Fire and Emergency Management. I am joined by Council Members Brewer, Carr, in person, and Holden via Zoom. Today, this committee will be conducting oversight on e-bikes and lithium-ion batteries fire safety, as well as hearing a package of related legislation. So far this year, the fire department has investigated over 175 related fires, a total that puts the city on track to more than double the number of battery-related fires from 2021 and quadruple the number of such fires in 2020. Reports indicate that lithium-ion batteries, especially those that are damaged, refurbished, or inexpensive, are most likely to catch fire when charging. And significant fire risks arise from batteries that are left unattended while charging for long periods of time, such as overnight. Discussion of this issue often highlights delivery workers who utilize e-bikes, many of whom may not have access to proper charging locations during work or after work hours, and charge their devices at home. As part of the 2021 NYC New York City Fire Code revision, provisions were added establishing safe storage and charging requirements for lithium-ion batteries used for mobility devices such as e-bikes and scooters. However, it is unclear to what extent these provisions will adequately address fire risks posed by e-bikes in residential homes, such as locations are largely exempt from those regulations. The committee hopes to examine the circumstances surrounding the proliferation of e-bike related fires, evaluate FDNY's response to this emerging fire safety risk, and consider potential measures to mitigate fire risks arising from these devices. To that end, the committee will also hear a package of legislation that aims to protect customers from dangerous products and increase public awareness regarding the fire safety risks posed by lithium-ion batteries and motorized bikes and scooters. Introduction 656, sponsored by Councilmember Brewer, requires the fire department to develop an informational campaign to educate the public on fire risks by powered mobility devices. Introduction number 663, sponsored by Councilmember Feliz, regulates the sale of storage batteries for powered mobility devices by requiring such batteries be approved by a recognized testing laboratory. Introduction number 772, sponsored by Councilmember Holden, requires the fire department to report on safety measures to mitigate fire risk associated with powered mobility devices. Introduction number 749, sponsored by Councilmember Aviles, relates to providing food delivery workers with information on safety measures that mitigate the fire risks posed by powered mobility devices. And introduction number 752, sponsored by Councilmember Brewer, which seeks to prohibit the sale and assembly of second-use lithium-ion batteries. The committee looks forward to hearing from the fire department on this legislation and hopes to work collaboratively to find appropriate solutions to decrease ever-growing problems of e-bike fires. I'd now like to invite our bill sponsors to speak on these bills. Councilmember Gail Brewer, if you would mind going first.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank you for holding this hearing. I think we all know that there are more fires, and we're all trying to figure out how to address both the need to have safety and at the same time make sure that there's good operations for the 65,000 delivery workers. So we all are concerned about safety, so I have a bill, as you heard from the chair, that would mandate that there be fire department information so that the notion of what a lithium battery is or is not is very clear to the public. And the second bill I have is more controversial. We're all trying to address this issue. If we are to not sell batteries that are reconstituted, refurbished. I think that we all want to recognize, too, that although we're having this here locally, we do need the federal government to step up, because these batteries are coming in from China, to be very honest with you, and we need the folks at Customs or whatever is appropriate to make sure that the batteries that do arrive from either U.S. or overseas are the ones that are safe for all workers. I think it's great that the state provided the opportunity for these faster bikes, e-bikes, but I think they forgot at the same time to make sure that they have a safe accompanying battery and bike. It's expensive for the workers to get started between the bike and the batteries, so I want to reiterate, this is the beginning of the conversation, and we look forward to figuring out what's a win-win for everybody. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Brewer. I'd also like to recognize Councilmember Oswald Feliz.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm New York City Council Member Oswald Feliz. I want to thank you, Chair Arreola, for this very important hearing. And I also want to thank all my colleagues that have introduced fire safety bills before this hearing today. The sharp rise in e-bike fires is concerning. The sharp rise in fires related to e-bike batteries is alarming. This year, we've had over 180 fires caused by lithium-ion batteries, including last week in a Midtown high-rise, wherein 43 people were injured. We need to make sure that products sold in the city of New York are safe for New Yorkers. It's why I'm proud to be introducing, and today we'll be hearing one of my bills, which requires that in order for lithium-ion batteries to be sold, that they be certified by a nationally recognized testing laboratory. We have various bills related to e-bike batteries, but we also want to make it very clear that there is a space in the city of New York for e-bikes. Delivery workers, AKA deliveristas, they work very hard. They work hard to keep our city running at all hours, and they also work very hard to support their families. And every single step of this process, we'll be engaging with them, and we look forward to constructing legislation that works for everyone in our city, including the families in our buildings and in our streets and our businesses, and also to our hardworking deliveristas. Thank you so much, and I'm looking very forward to the testimony and the conversations on this very important matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Feliz. I will now turn the mic over to our counsel, Josh Kingsley.
Thank you, Chair. We'll hear first from the administration today. We'll be hearing from FDNY and DCWP, Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. We'll also have individuals from DSNY for questions. So for the fire department, we will hear from Julian Basil, the Fire Code Counsel, Chief Thomas Carano, the Acting Chief of the Bureau of Fire Prevention, Michael Tiger from DCWP, and Carlos Ortiz. I'm just going to swear you all in. If you could just raise your right hand and affirm the following. You affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this committee, and to answer honestly to council member questions. I do. Thank you. I do. You may go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Arreola and all council members present. My name is Thomas Correo, and I am the Chief of Counterterrorism and Emergency Preparedness and the Acting Chief of Fire Prevention at the New York City Fire Department. I am joined today by Julian Basil, Fire Code Counsel for the FDNY. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about e-bikes and lithium-ion batteries. We appreciate the Council's attention to this issue. The Fire Department has been carefully tracking the increase in the use of lithium-ion batteries in mobility devices over the last several years. These batteries are commonly found in e-bikes, e-scooters, and other powered mobility devices such as electric skateboards and hoverboards. Though they have been on the rise for the past several years, the use of powered mobility devices multiplied dramatically during the pandemic. They have been ubiquitous among delivery workers, fueling a round-the-clock convenience that New Yorkers have come to rely upon. Our challenge is to strike the appropriate balance of ensuring public safety while not necessarily disrupting the livelihood and the enjoyment of others. As use has increased, the fire department has seen a corresponding spike in the number of fires and incidents related to lithium-ion batteries. Many of these fires have been intense and high profile. This past week, we responded to a fire in a high-rise apartment in Manhattan that began when an e-bike caught fire. It resulted in 38 injuries and required a daring rope rescue of individuals who narrowly escaped death via a window on the 20th floor. Whereas an injury stemming from a lithium-ion battery was a relatively rare occurrence in 2019, when we saw only a total of 13 such injuries, in 2021, we experienced 79. As of today, we've already identified 140 injuries and 191 fires attributed to lithium-ion batteries this year. Tragically, these fires have also led to 6 fatalities. As of today, we've experienced as many injuries, deaths, and overall fires involving lithium-ion batteries as we have from the previous 3 years combined. Lithium-ion battery fires present challenges to firefighters that are different from other types of fires. In addition to what we might consider a traditional fire, there's a threat of thermal runaway. This occurs when an excess of heat is generated within the battery, resulting in an uncontrollable self-heating status that exceeds the rate at which the heat can be safely dissipated. This causes a domino effect within the cells of the battery and potentially creates an explosive state, producing an ejection of gases, shrapnel, and particulates. Some of the council members present today attended a demonstration of the lithium-ion battery fire at the Fire Academy last week. Those of you who were there remember the thermal runaway, which was evident by the popping noises and billowing white smoke. This smoke is toxic and highly flammable. A fire in a single lithium-ion battery can easily spread to materials around it. If it is located near other lithium-ion batteries, the process may be repeated, increasing the intensity of the fire. In addition to starting fires, the presence of the lithium-ion battery at a fire caused by another source makes fighting the fire more dangerous. Another challenge to lithium-ion battery fires is that the danger is not over when the fire is out. The battery is still essentially a box of chemicals, and it is not unusual for it to reignite. Once these batteries are damaged or involved in fire, they may reignite hours or days after being initially extinguished. Even a thorough inspection may not predict if and when they may reignite. Given the unique difficulty with suppressing this type of fire, we dispatch FDNY hazardous materials units to help ensure that the batteries are properly handled. Hazardous materials has pioneered a procedure to eliminate the threat of damaged batteries. This is a new phenomenon in the world of fire suppression. As with a lot of new technology, the FDNY is at the forefront of understanding how the proliferation of lithium-ion batteries in vehicles such as e-bikes and e-scooters affects emergency response. Our experience with these devices, though greater than that of any other department in the country, is still relatively limited, and we continue to learn. As more devices appear in our communities, fire incidents have increased. We have observed several factors that contributed to these fires, and we've incorporated this knowledge into outreach pieces and safety materials. We encourage users to be FDNY smart when using any device powered by a lithium-ion battery. Examples include do not store your bike or scooter near your door or windows blocking exits. We've seen multiple examples of this blocking egress during fires, including the recent fire we had last week. Do not leave devices unattended when charging or leaving them to charge overnight. Only purchase or use devices that are listed by a qualified testing laboratory, such as Underwriters Laboratory. Do not charge a device under a pillow, a bed, or a couch. Only use the manufacturer's power cords and batteries that are made specifically for the device. Keep batteries and devices at room temperature and away from anything flammable. If a battery overheats or you notice an odor, change in shape or color, leaking, or odd noises from a device, discontinue use immediately. And finally, putting lithium-ion batteries into trash or recycling is illegal and dangerous. As fire incidents involving lithium-ion batteries have increased, the fire department has ramped up our level of outreach and education on the topic. We produced informational handouts and materials promoting safe usage of e-mobile devices. This past week, we finalized a video public service announcement informing viewers about the dangers of failing to take appropriate precautions around charging and storage devices. And we share that material extensively on social media with community contacts, including community boards and elected officials, and with industry groups that use e-bikes in their businesses. Many of the department leadership have given interviews and assisted media outlets with updating the public on this topic. We now conduct outreach specifically geared towards lithium-ion battery safety in neighborhoods where fires involving batteries have occurred. And we've also incorporated lithium-ion battery safety content into our general fire safety messaging. We partner with the Department of Transportation and the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection to share information about safety, and we've coordinated with the Department of Sanitation to discuss safe removal of batteries from fire incidents and issues of disposal. Members of the FDNY's Community Affairs Unit and our Fire Safety Education Unit have met with the deliveristas and other organizations distributing materials and speaking with delivery workers about the safest ways to use and charge their e-bikes. One approach that we are preparing is the train-the-trainer focus, giving tools to individuals so that they can help educate other members of the community on this topic. We continue to identify groups of users to reach out to, and we encourage the council members here today to let us know if you have additional suggestions for groups of whom we should connect with. As the department does with all fire safety materials, we made sure to create resources on this topic in a large variety of languages. When we partner with groups for whom an additional language would be useful, we work with members of the group in advance to produce versions in relevant languages. We know that safety material is only valuable when it can be understood by the people who are using it. In addition to the materials aimed at adults, we devoted an episode of the FDNY Smart Podcast for Kids to the topic of lithium-ion batteries for e-bikes, e-scooters, and other devices. We recognize that a long-term solution to these issues likely lies with manufacturers creating safer devices, and we have been in communication with the federal authority that has oversight over manufacturers. In a letter this summer to the chair of the United States Consumer Product Safety Commission, Fire Commissioner Laura Kavanaugh relayed this experience that we've observed with fire trends among powered mobility devices here in New York City. She urged the Consumer Product Safety Commission to enact regulatory measures and incentivize safer designs. The chair of the Consumer Product Safety Commission responded in October, noting that a variety of measures that the Commission is taking to address this issue, including collecting specimen and conducting research and data analysis here in New York City. The Consumer Product Safety Commission staff will use that knowledge to develop proposals for new standards. The Consumer Product Safety Commission has begun recommending that consumers take measures to minimize the risk of fire, and their list of recommendations is similar to our own. The Consumer Product Safety Commission also announced a recall last month on certain e-bikes, citing the risk of lithium-ion batteries igniting, exploding, and creating burn hazards to consumers. We will continue providing information and working with industry and federal regulators to improve these devices. I will now address the proposed legislation. Introduction 656. This legislation will require the fire department to develop an informational campaign to educate the public on fire risks posed by powered mobility devices. As I've noted, this is something that we already do, and we expect to continue developing and improving outreach on this topic. We are supportive of this bill. Introduction 663. This legislation would prohibit the sale of batteries for mobility devices that are not listed by a nationally recognized testing laboratory or approved organization. We agree with this objective, and it tracks with the safety tips that we use when addressing members of the public who may be considering purchasing e-mobility devices. We are supportive of this bill. Introduction 749. This legislation will require the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection and the Fire Department to provide information on safety measures that mitigate fire risks, and would also require food service establishments to provide delivery workers with safety information. We are supportive of this bill. Introduction 752. This legislation would prohibit the sale and assembly of second-use lithium-ion batteries. We are supportive of this bill. Introduction 722. This legislation will require an annual report that would include a variety of topics such as all fires caused by powered mobility devices, details of each fire including geographic location, building type, circumstances of each location, an overview of existing New York City Fire Code provisions governing storage and charging of powered mobility devices, an examination of regulatory approaches taken in other jurisdictions or proposed action on the state or federal level for mitigation of fire risks, among others. We were able to comply with the aim of this bill by reporting on powered mobility devices. However, we do have concerns about the best use of resources and what it might take to gather and produce all the elements of this report. We look forward to discussing potential refinements to ensure that we are maximizing resources towards fire suppression, fire prevention, and education. Each of these bills, we look forward to hearing from other city agencies, industry stakeholders, and powered mobility device users to inform the details. We welcome the Council's interest in this topic. We've had a number of conversations with members of the committee already, and we look forward to the ongoing dialogue. Part of our responsibility as first responders in New York City is confronting big challenges before anyone else. FDNY will stay engaged and active as this issue evolves, and we are grateful to have partners at the Council to provide support and help to protect the people and property of New York City. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So just a few questions. What existing fire code regulations pertain to motorized bikes and scooters powered by lithium-ion batteries? What existing fire codes exist?
Chair, I'm going to turn it over to Fire Code Counsel, Julian Basil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The fire department, from a regulatory perspective, as well as from a fire prevention and fire operations perspective, has been in the forefront of this issue. We were involved very early on in developing standards to address lithium-ion batteries. And in our 2022 fire code, we have provisions relating to regulating the storage and charging of e-bikes and other powered mobility devices. Mm-hmm. Those regulations establish general safety requirements for e-bike charging in a wide range of occupancies and businesses.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Did you want to add to that?
Well, I just to offer our testimony from the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Good morning, Chair Ariola and members of the committee. My name is Carlos Ortiz, and I'm the Assistant Commissioner for External Affairs at the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. And today I'm joined by DCWP's General Counsel, Michael Tiger. And thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the legislation related to powered mobility devices and lithium-ion batteries. As an agency, DCWP's mission-oriented priorities focus on consumer protection from deceptive trade practices and worker protections that promote equitable workplaces. While DCWP has no technical expertise regarding the fire risk posed by powered mobility devices and lithium-ion batteries, we do serve New Yorkers who purchase or utilize these devices throughout the course of their daily lives. The Adams administration is committed to ensuring that the utilization and regulation of these devices occurs in an equitable, sustainable, and safe manner. Turning to today's bills, Introduction 656 will require the New York City Fire Department to work in collaboration with DCWP on a public education campaign to highlight fire risks posed by powered mobility devices and the safety measures that mitigate those risks. Introduction 749 would require DCWP to establish materials providing guidance on the safe use and storage of powered mobility devices and ensure that food service establishments, third-party food delivery services, and third-party courier services distribute that guidance to their food delivery workers. The administration supports the intent of these bills and believes that educating the public on fire safety and fire risk is vital. DCWP is eager to partner in these efforts, although we do not believe our agency has the technical expertise for the creation of public guidance related to the safe use and storage of powered mobility devices and batteries as contemplated in Introduction 749. Moving on to the other bills on the agenda, Introduction 663 would prohibit the sales of batteries for powered mobility devices unless the batteries have been listed and labeled by a nationally recognized testing laboratory or other approved organization. Introduction 752 would prohibit the sale of second-use lithium-ion batteries, which, from our understanding, are batteries that have been assembled or reconditioned with cells removed from previously used batteries. DCWP would be tasked with enforcing both bills and would be empowered to issue civil penalties to any business that illegally sells the prohibited products. As my colleagues at the fire department testified to, the administration supports the intent of Introduction 663 and 752 to the extent they can address fire safety issues caused by certain identified batteries. DCWP regularly enforces consumer product restrictions, including a law passed earlier this year prohibiting the sale of space heaters that lack certain safety features and clear labeling of those features. For any prohibitions such as these, clear standards, packaging, and labeling are essential for enforcement. DCWP is also interested in hearing today from workers who may utilize powered mobility devices to better understand any impact these bills may have on their constituencies. We look forward to collaborating with the Council on these bills during the legislative process to create equitable and safe standards for New Yorkers. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. What types of mobility devices are subject to these regulations, and what specific fire safety requirements are included in the fire code?
The fire code has a definition of powered mobility device, and it encompasses all kinds of battery-powered micro-mobility devices, except those that are required to be registered with the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles. And in terms of the types of regulations, the fire code requires that any place where e-bikes or other micro-mobility devices are going to be stored or charged, well, if they're going to be charged, that they have adequate electrical supply, outlets, prohibits use of extension cords and power strips. It requires separation of the batteries or devices for safety purposes. It requires natural or mechanical ventilation. Separation from combustible materials, combustible waste, and hazardous materials. Separation from any areas in which work is being done on powered mobility devices. And where there's 6 or more devices, that they be in a separate fire-rated room with sprinklers and smoke detectors. That's a general characterization of what's required for charging. A simple storage room has fewer requirements, but is basically intended not to place these bikes in areas where they would come into contact with combustible materials or hazardous waste.
Thank you. So we've all seen the photographs of 10 and 15 bikes being plugged into, in a basement in a commercial building or a restaurant. So what type of outreach are you doing? And when you do the outreach there and you find a condition like that, this is both for the fire department and Department of Consumer Affairs and Worker Protection, like how often are you going out to check places? Are you reactive or proactive? I guess that's my question.
Thank you very much for the question. I would say both. Let me start with proactive. So we have a very robust educational and awareness safety campaign that involves a whole FDNY effort that includes safety material that is published on social media, Facebook, Instagram. We also have podcasts so that we get that information out to as many as the public in general. In addition, we also respond, our Special Investigations Unit for the Bureau of Fire Prevention will respond, and they've actually done inspections in a lot of these commercial buildings where we have had fires. They've issued, to date, 19 summonses and 10 violations. So I would say it is both proactive and in a response mode as well. We have a weekly working group, a personal mobility device working group, where we're developing outreach material to the public, including targeted material to food delivery workers, That material will be handed out from our fire inspectors, direct outreach. We also have a train-the-trainer program. We're really trying to a force multiplier. So if we can train and partner with those in the food delivery industry to train and get the word out about safe practices. So we are really trying from a whole suite of different areas, as well as unfortunately, after we have a fatal fire, ma'am, we actually have a fatal fire campaign that goes out, and we will provide information right at the point, right after the incident, to try to address the safety issues. We've also done multiple community board demonstrations and presentations on best safety devices and safety practices. And of course, we do everything interagency. We work closely with the Department of Sanitation, the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, and we will continue to do so to try to put out the best information we possibly can to the public.
Appreciate that.
And Councilmember, we are in close communication with our colleagues at the fire department and coordination as well on outreach. And as I mentioned during my testimony, we're certainly supportive of deepening that partnership and to ensure that workers, New Yorkers, are getting the safety materials that they need, and that we have an equitable and sustainable use of these devices.
Okay, great. And so when you do find in a situation where a summons or a violation is given out, what are the summonses? What are the ranges for those summonses? What is the amount attached to the summons for any person who is in violation of these fire code regulations?
I would have to double check what category this falls into, but as a general matter, depending on the kind of violation, typically first violation would be under $1,000. If a criminal court summons, it could be more, but it's in that range. I'd have to get back to you on the specifics.
Okay, and it's not just commercial businesses, it's private homes, right? So what provisions of the fire code apply to individuals who charge their motorized bikes or scooters in their homes or apartments?
The fire department does not have a inspection program for private homes, 1- and 2-family homes. For historical reasons, that's not, we don't go into people's homes and inspect them under normal circumstances, obviously absent an emergency such as a fire or other emergency condition. What the 2022 fire code did try to do was to restrict the number of powered mobility devices that are allowed in a 1- or 2-family home or in a dwelling unit in an apartment building. Obviously, before the 2022 fire code, you could have as many of these devices as you wanted. The 2022 fire code restricted it to 5 unless you were going to comply with the regulations applicable to other kinds of buildings and businesses, which in most circumstances would be impractical. We understood that this was not something that the fire department would be going out and enforcing in a normal course. However, our hope was that by putting this in the code, we would empower building owners, including apartment building owners, landlords, to enforce limits on this. And we were specifically addressing the concern, which we were aware of at the time that the code was drafted back in 2019 and early 2020, before all the current outbreak of fires. We were aware that there were things called app gigs, or people being employed through apps on their phone or otherwise to engage in commercial activity in their apartments or private dwellings. They would be recruited to take e-bikes off the streets, bring them back to their homes and charge them and bring them back to the street for money. And obviously that is not appropriate use of residential premises to conduct a business, and it did increase the hazard by bringing multiple e-bikes into the home and charging them probably under conditions that are less than optimal, if not outright unsafe. We allowed 5 in recognition of the fact that this is not just about e-bikes, that we're regulating any type of battery-powered device, a lithium-ion battery-powered device, and increasingly, people may have this for other kinds of devices, and that was just the number we chose as a way of trying to put a reasonable limit on the personal use. Now, they're only allowed to have up to 5 devices of any type for personal use, not for commercial use.
Thank you. I'll now yield my time to Councilmember Feliz, who has a few questions.
Thank you so much, Chair Ariola. Let me start by thanking every single member of our fire department. We see your bravery every single day at all hours, including last week when we had that horrible high-rise fire in Midtown Manhattan, wherein 43 people were injured. That day, many, if not all of us, saw that video, that incredibly dangerous rescue operation wherein they crossed floors with a rope, putting their lives at risk to save the lives of other people. And we're incredibly thankful for the work that our fire department does, again, every single day at all hours. I also want to thank you for that very informative lithium-ion battery fire demonstration last week in Randall's Island. That was very helpful. A few questions. We've seen the number of fires related to lithium-ion batteries quickly rise. This year, we've had about 180 fires. That's about double the amount compared to last year, and that's 4 times the amount compared to maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Why are the numbers going up now? What are factors that are playing a role?
Thank you very much for the question, Council Member. So we did see a dramatic rise, I think, during the pandemic, as well as its ability to be, such a useful device. We all see the type of traffic conditions that are used, and I think ease of use and being able to get around. It's a good device to be able to use, as well as its commercial use and delivery operations. So I think the combination of the two, I think, has led to the increase in its availability and its use.
Thank you. We've seen these batteries explode in our streets, literally explode in our streets, in our businesses, in our homes. What about these batteries make them susceptible to fires and explosions?
So the exact nature, the electrical chemical nature of this, the science that actually makes it so useful as a personal mobility device is also its downfall in a fire. So there's so much energy that is into that lithium-ion mixture, basically a box of chemicals, so to speak, that when it goes wrong for multiple reasons, it sets off a thermal runaway. It's a chemical chain reaction. It rapidly heats up to the point where the heat cannot be contained. One battery will propagate fire to another battery, and you really have an explosive type of event occur. And that's what we've been finding in many of these fires.
Thank you for the information. We have different types of lithium-ion batteries. Some are certified, some are not certified. What about certified batteries makes them safer compared to non-certified batteries?
So I think when we look at lithium-ion technology, we have to really look at it as a safety handshake. The device, the battery, the charger, all that's meant to work together. So when you have a rated device, when you have something that's used according to manufacturer specifications, that's the very base safety equation that we can achieve.
Okay, and we have many different items and devices that use lithium-ion batteries, cars, cell phones. So talk to us about those devices, and also are those devices safer compared to to e-bike batteries, and why or why not?
So This is an area that we're continuing to do research on, and certainly, in the public sphere, we've seen, fires in, electric vehicles and things like that. But I think the personal mobility devices, I think the wear and tear and the use of them and the proliferation of them, I think is almost putting them in like a special category. That doesn't mean that a larger energy storage system, it still has to be manufactured, installed, very close fire code and specifications. It still has the potential to cause a problem, but I think the personal mobility devices are almost in a separate category because of the proliferation in their use, but we're also finding hazards associated with that.
Thank you. Final question. I know my time is up for now. Going to the issue of enforcement, if the FDNY becomes aware of an apartment where there's like 10 batteries being charged, what enforcement powers, if any, does FDNY currently have?
So, as I think Code Counsel had said that in terms of in the apartment itself, we don't have statutory authority to be able to address that. We try in really every fire and emergency medical run that we go on to educate, right? And if we see something that, we might be there on a separate run, we might be on an emergency medical call, we try to educate the public, we try to point out things. So education is our strongest foundation.
Let me just add one thing to that. If it was brought to our attention and we were able to confirm that there was unlawful storage or activities going on in an apartment, we typically would write violations to the building owner, typically. Now, it may be that under certain circumstances, we could write it to the lessee or the tenant. Obviously, I assume you're talking about a residential setting. In a commercial setting, we may also write it to the commercial tenant. But under the right circumstances, we would be able to write a violation for that. But, establishing this, as I said, we don't typically go in and inspect this. So, enforcement within dwelling units is always a challenge and not something that we have a regular inspection program for.
Thank you so much.
Councilmember Brewer.
Thank you very much, and I too want to thank the fire department for all of your work on this issue and others, and Jason Shelley is always very responsive. I want you to know that. And I call him often. So we're very concerned about this issue. The concern I have is because I am very cognizant of the need to have safety, and I'm very cognizant of the fact that the delivery workers have to work, just like you are. So there's a conundrum here in some ways. So my question to you is, how do we figure out how to have no refurbished batteries if that is the problem? And even though it's my bill, I want to be clear that I am open for ideas, because I feel strongly that that's one way that the bike and the batteries should not be coexisting. At the same time, as you indicated earlier, if you start mixing cells, you could end up with a problem. So I want to understand more. Is there some way we should be regulating the stores that sell them? That would be Consumer Affairs, perhaps, in addition to the fire department. And is the problem really the refurbished batteries? Would everybody be safer if we were using new batteries, certified or not? I don't know the difference between a new battery and a certified battery. I need some clarification on what would be the safest, and then we have to deal with the cost of safety, because that's also a problem. So I could use some help on some of these issues.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember. I think certainly with a multidimensional issue such as this, with the e-bikes and e-batteries and the workers and the fact that they're utilizing this for their livelihoods, we certainly want to be mindful of equity, but also safety, as my colleagues at the fire department have pointed out. Certainly, we're supportive of the introduction that you've mentioned. Of course, wanting to hear from the workers here today to see how this bill could possibly impact them. Additionally, I think there were the educational piece, I think, is always a fundamental component of any bill or any new regulation, to ensure that workers are empowered with that information and know that they should be pointed towards perhaps a different product or looking at a different product. And I was also very, I think the point that you raised earlier about the federal government stepping up and ensuring that we have nationwide standards that promote safety, I think is going to be key to making sure that the market appropriately provides the right product.
Yeah, that's not going to happen soon.
No, I think these are complementary pieces, Council Member, and that's why I think we're encouraged to work on these bills with you all and with our colleagues here at the Fire Department and other sister agencies that touch upon this issue.
But do you regulate any of the stores now that sell batteries or not?
Currently, I think we have consumer-facing protections with respect to deception that we would apply to many stores across New York City. There isn't currently I would say any type of licensing requirement as there is. I mean, sometimes that is not necessarily an easy way to address an issue because it's not necessarily industry that sells batteries necessarily. It's these stores also have multiple different products that they're selling.
And there's online also.
Yeah, and there's online as well. Although we would consider online sales to be something subject to these regulations too. So I think that is all to say is that I think we're encouraged with this piece of legislation and would want to work to create those clear standards around these products to make sure that workers don't. To make sure that workers are able to buy products that are safe for them.
Okay, so for the fire department then, what is it that is in the reconstituted that's not in the new? And is there any reconstituted battery that is safe, or is it just haphazard? How do we discover or decide what's safe and what's not safe?
I think what the chief said earlier is that these systems have to be designed to work together, that the battery has to be designed for the particular device, and it has to be a mesh with the charging system. And that's where it appears we're having significant safety issues, is that charging batteries, they may be charged at different power levels, different amperage. They may not know that the battery is fully, if they're not meshed, they may not know whether it's fully charged, so that it continues to overcharge and cause overheating. Now, given that, I think, indications are at this point in time, do-it-yourselfers are not doing anyone a favor. They are creating hazards, and they're not equipped or capable of designing systems, batteries, replacement batteries, or whatever they call them, that can work with the devices. UL is there for many, many consumer products, and this is obviously a consumer product issue that in some ways exceeds the scope of the fire department's role here. We're struggling to manage it through our normal regulatory processes. But the reality is that this is a consumer product that has some issues. The UL process or similar processes are there to make sure that the battery is designed and manufactured to work in a way that is safe and in the way that it's designed to work. And having all of people just, taking what looks like a AA battery and reconfiguring them or adding batteries to soup up the battery to get, more performance or longer battery life is dangerous. And I think it's a good, enforcement may be a challenge, but obviously the first step is to prohibit it.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I just want to note that Councilmember Gutierrez and Councilmember Yeager has joined us. Thank you so much. Before I yield back to my colleagues, I just wondered if when doing your outreach, when thinking about how we can keep people safe, because we have had an uptick now of people using motorized bikes that use lithium-ion batteries for deliveries, for personal use. Have you looked outside our jurisdiction, looked into other countries as to how they're handling it? Because they were way ahead of us on that, and they were using ion battery-charged vehicles before, in large numbers before we were. So are we looking outside of our own jurisdiction to find ways to help keep people safe, where what did they do? Did they use only certified? Were there charging stations available where they could swap out so they're not overcharging their batteries? Were delivery companies who were utilizing deliveristas held accountable for regulating what type of battery their deliveristas are using? So are we looking outside of our own little bubble here to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep people safe?
Thank you for the question, Chair. If it would be okay, I'd like to just follow up on one thing that Code Counsel had said with the refurbishment or adding batteries. We actually had 2 fatalities that were directly related to that, so I just did want to mention that it is a particular problem. In answer to your question, that is one of the reasons that we held a recent symposium on lithium-ion technology, and we brought together many fire departments, industry experts, the Underwriters Laboratories, and really the answer is actually many folks are actually looking to us. The FDNY, New York City, is really taking the lead on this, and we're really happy to share information. But a lot of jurisdictions are actually looking to us to see how we're handling this, and how what comes out in terms of safety regulations and best practices.
And for Mr. Ortiz, so what are you doing when you find that there is someone who is say a delivery company or a certain restaurant that is always, maybe not the first time, maybe not the second time, but the third time you go there, and they're still not compliant with the regulations? What do you do with, say, the delivery companies that are now just partnering with the restaurant and not requiring their deliveristas to be registered or have the proper batteries, or have safety guidelines for their deliveristas? We're worried about people's lives, and that's why this package of bills is so important.
Yes, Councilmember, and I think speaking more broadly first, I'd say the types of regulations that we are enforcing at the Department of Consumer Worker Protection really relate to the fair working conditions of food delivery workers engaged by third-party apps and third-party courier services. So typically, we've been, and let me say, I think that some of those laws and rules for protecting delivery workers are some of the most forward-thinking in the country, certainly. And we've been working closely with stakeholders such as Los Deliveristas Unidos to ensure that we're constantly in contact and receiving feedback and working closely with them, as well as working closely with apps as well, and to understand the conditions of the industry. I think if there are certainly any violations of our laws and rules, we would look into an investigation. Also, whether that's an implication on the rights of the workers, or an implication on the app's license. I think if we ever received any type of complaints or any information related to a fire safety issue, we would work closely with the fire department to make sure that information gets to them with respect to any workplaces or businesses that are not compliant with their code.
And I must say, in my own experience in my district, both the fire department and consumer affairs and worker protection has been very, very responsive when called if we find that there is an issue. I will now yield my time to Councilmember Gutierrez, who has a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for hosting today's hearing. And thank you both for being here. This is obviously an issue that I think, based on the summary that you all provided on where the fires are being found, I think is impacting every community, every income level. It's really important that we spend the time to resolve. I'm curious, in the instances where we've seen a significant amount of fires in public housing in NYCHA versus residential, is there anything that you can share with us about what those investigations afterwards have demonstrated? Are there any distinctions between fires occurring in NYCHA versus fires occurring in other residential to the same density versus like 1 to 2 family? Are there any distinct circumstances that you can point to in those instances?
Thank you very much for the question. So fires in high-rise multiple dwellings are a tremendous challenge under any circumstances. So we have to, really, it's a race for time between the heat of the fire, the toxicity of the chemicals in the smoke, and the smoke itself. These lithium-ion fires are really a game changer. It's almost like a quantum leap, similar to what we found when we had to change our firefighting operations from older type of legacy fires to new modern fires. This is yet again another quantum leap. And the problem is they take off with such explosive force that they decrease that egress time for those occupants, particularly if they're stored near the front door. So it's really a challenge. It's a challenge in any occupancy, but really in a high-rise multiple dwelling such as New York City Housing Authority dwelling, it's a major safety concern.
Is there anything unique about NYCHA's composition that it poses a higher level of a challenge in these instances?
I would think, I look at really high-rise multiple dwellings as, in terms of the generic state, in terms of, what we've experienced with fire and smoke and the hazards to occupants, as well as the challenges to firefighting. So I don't think I would break out NYCHA. I think I would just look at it holistically, high-rise multiple dwelling.
Absolutely, thank you. The FDNY puts battery fires at approximately 200 this year. In any of those cases of fires involving the batteries, is there any proof of aging or faulty wiring being an issue?
So one of the major problems with investigating these type of fires is that the evidence, so to speak, and the material is so heavily damaged. However, when our fire marshals, and we have our chief fire marshal here today, when they do their cause and origin investigation, a big part of what they do is interviews. They speak to witnesses, they speak to the people in the apartment. And they've actually went beyond what their normal duties would be in terms of cause and origin to try to determine what was the type of device, when was it charged last, what type of charger. So we're trying to continually pull that together. Anecdotally, we find that there are many reasons for this. It could be, as we stated before, not using or using mismatched products. There could be, it's a device that's heavily used. It could also be caused by being damaged. Overheating is a whole host of issues that could occur.
Thank you. What education exists today in regards to disseminating information to safely charging these batteries for folks? And how does it differ? Does it differ between folks looking to charge in residential spaces versus commercial, or is there a blanket kind of safety protocol that people can access?
Sure. So we're really trying to address both audiences, and my co-counsel can speak even more, but we have an annual fire safety notice that is tailored to bulletin, I'm sorry, bulletin that is addressed for residents of residential high-rise type of dwelling. So we've recently updated that to include lithium-ion safety. We've also addressed it. Let me step back. We also will be addressing it with the commercial industry as well. We are partnering with the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection to reach out to deliveristas. We have beginning a train-the-trainer program to be the widest possible footprint that we can to make sure that we get safety practices, best safety practices out there. We want to actually, it's a partnership. It's really taking ownership with us to try to make it as safe as possible. We also address schools, community boards, social media on 3 different social media platforms. So really the widest possible audience that we can reach, we try to do so.
Thank you. Chair, can I ask one more baby question? Thank you so much. My last question is for both agencies. Have you had conversations, or can you share if you are in support of city-owned operating charging stations across the city?
Okay, I have not had those conversations. I'd be happy to engage in further conversation on that and sort of find out more. And
Similarly, I have not had those conversations either, but can certainly touch base with the mayor's office for more
Open to
information for you.
Okay, thank you both. Thank you, Chair, so much.
Thank you. As you know, Councilmember Holden is on Zoom, and this question is from him, and I'm happy to ask it for him. Of the 191 battery fires, how many were due to faulty equipment or improper mismatched products, if you know?
So that's an area that we're still developing out, continued research. As I said, it's very difficult because the material, a lot of times it's so damaged, and we have to really put it together by interviews, but it's something we're actually trying to pull together those specific trends. So we'd be happy to try to get further information for you on that.
Thank you. And to what extent do we believe are retailers, repair stores, or other commercial entities storing and charging multiple e-bikes in the same location? Ballpark.
I'm not sure that we currently have that information, council member, in terms of retailers that are charging batteries for folks who are utilizing them for their bikes.
Okay. All right, thank you. We're going into a second round, and Councilmember Brewer has a question.
Thank you. I do want to follow up on the retail situation because we have a retail and we have an online. We understand both of them. And is there, in addition to what we're talking about, the fires and the batteries themselves, is anybody thinking about the retail issue? I know you just asked about it, but is that something that's on your agenda to figure out who is selling them and if they're doing so legally? I just want to understand, because I know that the deliveristas are concerned about that. They are worried, understandably, and I think that Consumer Affairs indicated that if we are outlawing, which I think is necessary, but is still of concern, some of these reconstituted batteries, they have to pay more for the new batteries. Why is it that they're actually being sold in the first place, batteries that are unsafe? So what are we doing about the retail aspect of this, online and in the store?
I think what we've been trying to identify is working with the baristas to better understand the types of equipment that they're utilizing throughout the course of the outreach efforts that the city has been engaging in, also educating them on the proper use of that equipment. With respect to these bills, I think they do look into the retailer question by prohibiting the sale of certain products that I think based on the expertise of our colleagues in the fire department, that these products are not necessarily safe as currently being sold, and that there are other mechanisms that we can establish to ensure that we have safe products sold. And I think again, from the perspective of the DCWP, ensuring that there's consistent communication with Los Deliveristas Unidos and other worker advocates, I think is important to for this package of bills as well.
Okay. And then I know the fire department talked about talking to some of the federal agencies, but I believe that most of these batteries are coming from China. I'm no expert, but that's my understanding. So the U.S. Customs have we also been in touch with them to see that we could have basic safety guidelines for the batteries that are coming through U.S. Customs? Otherwise, they can't come. Is that also something that's on your agenda at the fire department, talking through the mayor's Washington office, Crystal Price, et cetera?
So one of the things that I want to highlight is that on a local level, so our Bureau of Fire Investigation work closely with the Consumer Product Safety Commission to effect a recall of a troublesome device that it was an online sale. So, we're trying to address it right away. Also, our Commissioner, Laura Kavanaugh, has engaged with the head of the Consumer Product Safety Commission, really to bold out what is occurring, what we're experiencing in New York City. They have re-engaged with us, and they're also doing research, specimen analysis on different types of devices that are involved in the city. So we are engaging at that level. As far as the Customs and Border Protection, I would have to check into that, ma'am, further.
I would just add one thing with regard to the question about reconstituted or second-use batteries. We've had conversations with UL about their certification procedures. They indicated that they are able and willing to certify replacement products. So, these are products not necessarily by the original manufacturer, and they would be willing to work with the replacement product manufacturer to certify that this is designed for use in a particular kind of bike or e-bike or other mobility device. So, and they maintain that the certification is not directly related to the cost. The product costs what the manufacturer decides it can sell it for, and the certification does not, in their view, significantly change that. So one should not assume that valid, listed, certified replacement products could not be made available at a modest price.
Thank you.
Councilmember Feliz.
Thank you so much for all the information. A few more questions. Where does lithium-ion related fires rank when compared to other fires that we've had this past year? Or last 2 years, last 3 years?
So do you want to, like on a city basis or, by community board? Or I just want to clarify the question, sir.
I think general city basis would be fine.
Okay, great. So in 2002, just referring to my notes, sir, so we have basically 191 investigations. We've had 142 structural fires and 49 non-structural fires. I know that they're broken down, but we've had a significant amount, almost 3 times the amount in residential occupancies than commercial. I just want to make sure I'm answering your question, sir.
Well, more specifically, on the issue of different causes of fires, where do fires caused by e-bike batteries rank when compared to fires caused by space heaters, electrical wiring systems, and other problems?
So I want to get you a specific, correct answer, sir. So, obviously we respond to thousands of fires every single year. Anecdotally, we know that this is, an increasing issue, and especially with the severity of the fires, but I'd be happy to get you a very specific answer to that, sir.
Okay, perfect. Also, is there any enforcement system that FDNY currently has where they could seize an item that poses fire safety problems? Obviously not e-bikes. I know earlier you said you don't have that for e-bike batteries, but for any other device that poses fire safety problems.
The fire department does have the ability to seize products that are hazardous or deemed to be hazardous at the particular location in which they're found. The problem is for any specific battery or e-bike or other powered mobility device, it's unclear whether that device is unsafe at any particular point in time. So that would be a challenge. But if we were able to ascertain, obviously if the battery is failing or is showing signs of failing, obviously we could seize it and arrange for its removal. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I'm trying to address it.
It does, yeah. Also, I think a lot of us are talking about e-bikes, but there's other mobility devices that use these lithium-ion batteries. Have we seen similar challenges with the scooters, mopeds, and those types of mobility devices?
So I think it's important that we in general to look at this as a lithium-ion challenge. So certainly we find it in other devices. It's I think with the proliferation of the use of certain devices, we may have seen that more. But I think it's very important to look at it as a lithium-ion general challenge because of the type of thermal runaway hazard that we have seen.
I think it's fair to say that as the chief indicated, that lithium-ion technology has this issue about thermal runaway, and it's applicable to many devices. And I think what we've said earlier is what seems to be a contributing factor in the case of e-bikes and other personal mobility devices, including scooters, is that they're really getting a beating out there. I mean, they're used, you know, this is not a recreational item that people use for a couple hours and put it away. And this is something that's being used, you know, 16 hours a day on city roads with potholes, in all sorts of weather with, you know, road salt on it, heated, this may be a contributing factor. That's what our, Marshall investigations are trying to get additional details.
All right, 2 final questions. My time is going to be up very soon. Number 1, the fire department generally recommends that e-bike batteries, that people purchase UL certified e-bike batteries. Does the FDNY think that allowing any nationally recognized testing laboratory would help resolve the issue, or are you strongly suggesting that the requirement be UL? And the second question is, are there any other suggestions that you have for us that would help resolve this crisis that we haven't talked about today?
As to the first question, yes, we recommend reference to specific UL standards, which have become the industry standards that the Bike Dealers Association itself is recommending. Other certifying entities may develop standards similar, but for purposes of enforcement and for clarity, the fire code has adopted these UL standards, and we've recommended that you reference those standards.
And I think to the second question, and it's a credit to what's occurring here, is a layered approach. Really, starting with the manufacturers, making sure that we have devices that are, safe from the beginning and how they're designed, educational literature, a realistic enforcement model. I think it really, the only way to tackle this challenge is really a layered approach.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry. Just to add one thing, I'm told that we did indicate in our comments that we would work with equivalent standards, and we could address that possibly through rules. But we certainly would want to, if, at a minimum, reference the UL standards that are in the fire code.
Okay, we do have follow-up questions from Councilmember Holden, which I'm happy to ask. Since the issue is very complicated, would the FDNY recommend that no e-bikes be charged indoors?
I think that's a complicated issue because, because it does straddle that line between, we and as in anything we do with the FDNY, we want it to be fire safe, we want civilians to be safe and users to be safe, but we understand it has a very legitimate use. So I would say we'd have to build on that and do more research into that and what different charging options and really how realistic they are in considering all the other types of use issues that are out there. So,
Right. Okay, thank you, Chief. And for Consumer Affairs, are there any warnings issued about safety hazards at the point of sale? And if so, what manufacturers are doing a good job? And on the flip side, what manufacturers are doing a poor job, if you know?
Councilmember, we don't issue warnings at a point of sale related to these fire safety issues, and I couldn't speak to the manufacturer's question.
Okay. Good enough, thank you. And we do have additional questions from Councilmember Gutierrez.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a couple of follow-up questions from the last round. The first one is, considering what Councilmember Brewer was mentioning about just how easy it is to kind of import these various kinds of batteries, it just seems like it's really inconsistent for us to provide safety, protocols around these when these batteries are, it seems like it takes, 24 hours for them to turn around a new kind of a battery or new kind of operating device. So I'm curious how how are you, both agencies, kind of keeping track of these instances? And what is the goal? Because it doesn't seem like a uniform protocol is really appropriate in these instances where they are, pounding these out faster than we can keep up with them.
I think from the perspective of DCWP and what prospective enforcement would look like of these bills related to the sale of the batteries, I think for us, clear standards and universal standards that are easily identifiable is fundamental to our enforcement, as well as for consumers as well who could be purchasing these products.
And I think from the FDNY standpoint, so as I had mentioned earlier, our Bureau of Fire Investigation is really going way beyond their cause and origin duties to try to, in the course of our investigation, identify, what type of brand was used, what type of battery, how long it's being charged, really a whole spectrum of information to be able to get ahead of this and identify, specific issues. That being said, we're certainly open to any ideas from the council to try to build on that.
Thank you. One of the bills here is specific about education to deliveristas, to folks that use these, but I think something that's really important that we're hearing from the deliveristas on the ground is, the onus also needs to be on the manufacturers and the business and the distributors as well. What are some of the steps that the city is taking to combat that? It could be that we're taking no steps, but I'm just curious.
I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. So one of the bills talks about the importance of education, an education campaign and outreach campaign to people, to deliveristas specifically, or folks that are using these bikes, right? So it's about safety so that they know as much as they can before they get on the road. I also feel that the onus should be on the businesses, on the retailers, like mentioned by Councilmember Brewer, but as well as the manufacturers and distributors. So I'm curious, what are the steps that we are taking, because the onus needs to be on them as well. If people go into this in good faith, and I don't need to tell you, deliveristas are giving up a big chunk of their income to purchase these devices to be able to work, the onus really should also be on these manufacturers, on distributors. So is there something that agencies are doing, that the city is doing to emphasize safety, the importance of safety to these manufacturers and distributors in the same way as with the deliveristas or, consumers?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I was just trying to, thank you for repeating the question and for the question. So one of the things that I had mentioned previously was the outreach to the Consumer Product Safety Commission by our fire commissioner, and really to try to, to explain the situation that we're dealing with in New York City and the challenges, and to get that very important discussion that you mentioned rolling in the right direction. As a fire service, we can't do that without partnership at various levels, regulatory levels. So we would want to build on that, and part of that is also research and defining what's the specific problems are, maybe particularly what particular brands, and all those other types of factors. So I agree with you. I think there's just more work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Councilmember, I just want to add as well that the particular bills prohibiting the sale of certain batteries as well, I think that's certainly putting the onus on businesses to make sure that they're selling safe batteries to consumers. But additionally, as New York City as a major market too, I think would have implications on what would be sold in our city as well overall. So I think as we've all been discussing, these are certainly complementary steps that are all working in concert to a goal for safety and equity for workers and New Yorkers.
Thank you. And then my last question is related to City Bike, mainly because, as you mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, folks that are using these e-bikes, it's not just a 1 hour a day, they're on this for hours a day, and so it's overused. City Bike is obviously, I think, being used as well. Can you all explain kind of what you think the issue is there versus the bikes that are being utilized at City Bike, the e-bike and pedal assist, versus the ones that we are all buying off the street?
So I think that the issue becomes as Code Counsel had mentioned, the type of device that was meant really probably as a personal use, that now is being used in a commercial type of way, tremendous wear and tear in the city, that I guess that's where we're beginning to see, one, not the only issue, but perhaps one of many issues that is leading to some of the safety hazards and fire incidents that is occurring. So I want to make sure, did I answer your question correctly?
Sorry, I'm just curious because if we are aware that overuse is an issue, why is it working for, we don't see the same instances of fires, of issues, or just issues with City Bike as we see with, regular e-bikes that everybody can access?
Yeah, I don't think we know enough about City Bike's operation, but it may be that City Bike, from its past experiences, has become sensitized to this issue and is monitoring, battery replacement carefully. Hopefully that is why they may be having less instances. Maybe they're only buying original manufacturer equipment that is designed to work with the bike. We don't really know what they're doing, but if they're not having any problems, hopefully they're doing the right thing there.
Thank you, Chair.
It's a different, I learned from the Develistas, it's a different battery. It's a $900 battery. It's not used very much. It's very different than the ones that the delivery people are using. I've seen them both, all thanks to Hilda Lean. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Brewer. We've been joined by Majority Leader Keith Powers, and you have a question.
Yeah,
Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, my district had the recent fire last week in Midtown, which, first of all, I want to say thank you to all the members of FDNY who I think did great work to minimize and help rescue and prevent that from getting further out of control. It's also my understanding the building had some good fire protections in there that also assisted with it not being worse than we might have imagined. I have a couple questions. So and I've been hearing from the residents of that building for the last week who feel like they have no real basic understanding of what measures are in place, what measures will be put in place when it comes to fire safety. And this seems to be mostly a failure of the building management and the building owner to provide information to the residents of that building. So we are trying to work to address that. I think altogether, like after these incidents, and especially in this one where it was high profile, and thank God it was minimized. I think there's just a tremendous amount of information that doesn't get into the hands of residents, and I think that there is for sure a role of the property owner there to work with their residents who are paying rent to them and to address it. But I also, I'd ask for assistance here too, because I think what I've heard consistently from folks who never called their council member but now are suddenly finding out who represents them because they want to know what's going on is really kind of lack information about what's happening. I think the FDNY also could help play a role, and I'd ask for assistance there to work and provide information to the residents about perhaps what is happening, what steps need to happen, if there are violations issued, anything of that sort. But maybe you can tell me what steps, if any, have been taken since the fire last weekend?
Thank you very much for the question. So, yes, to your point, our fire safety education team went directly out to the building the very next day. It's something we've done with any kind of fatal fire. We try to blanket the area with educational materials. We also send out our fire suppression unit and to make sure that stamp type sprinklers were working correctly. We also sent out our special inspection unit to follow up on any other type of violations. We found a couple of minor ones, but nothing of any great significance. And of course, there's the ongoing, Bureau of Fire Investigation look into the cause of the fire and what occurred. So we try to make sure that we get information in the hands of residents as quickly as possible to try to support that education and that feeling of like outreach, and that the fire department can try to address their questions and needs.
So one thing I'd ask, and I'll follow up with the department as well, is to provide me with any information you can that I can talk to the residents there to provide them with some updates on what's going on. And second, if there's any other steps you can take to help address and provide information to them. There's just a noticeable absence here of the property owner. And by the way, if you are talking to the property owner, tell them the council member's looking for them, and that we would like to find some organized way to provide the residents there with some comfort and security about that their building is safe. In this case, I believe they had a prohibition on the bikes, and I think this person had maybe multiple of them, so they were breaking the buildings, codes, I guess. But any information that we could provide, any line of communication would be extremely helpful. One follow-up question is, I had done a letter with Councilmember Brewer and another colleague of ours a few months back to the federal agencies that could be regulating these. I believe the fire department did as well, asking for better standards around how to regulate these. Have you been in receipt of a response to that? And if so, can you share with us what was the response and the content of that?
So what it can share is the response to Commissioner Kavanaugh's letter to the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and the response I had heard back, or I had seen, was that basically they are looking at the same issues that we are, and also the same safety recommendations. They're also working to do further analysis in the city, specimen critical analysis in terms of what type of equipment is being involved in this fire, and build conclusions off that.
Okay, and if you guys can share with me or us the response, perhaps. We have not received one yet, but I believe since you have, maybe we could get a better understanding of what. I think our letter mirrored the content. And just have 1 second, I'll ask one question. My last question is, some of the residents of the building have asked me just frankly outright, do you as their fire department and do we as a city find at this moment the e-bikes with the batteries that seem to be versions of the batteries that seem to be unsafe right now? Are we confident that we should continue to have them in people's buildings or on the streets in light of the dangers that are being presented right now, seemingly across the city? Do you have a response to that question? Because I've been asked that multiple times from the residents of that building and in the community.
So I think with any fire prevention, fire safety issue, the situation is changed when we adhere to the best safety protocols possible. Earlier, I had spoken to a safety handshake, right? We are using weighted devices. We're using devices that are meant to be used together, such as the battery and the charger. Proper charging protocol, best safety practices, don't charge them unintended. So I think there's a space where we can safely use different types of devices, but it does require a base of education and awareness of what the challenges are if they're not used properly.
Thank you. Thanks to the chair.
Thank you. Seeing that there are no further questions, I just want to end with a statement. Like Councilmember Feliz and Councilmember Riley, we did go to Randall's Island, and you put on a very informational and eye-opening demonstration of what happens when ion batteries that are used for mobile devices catch fire. And they don't just catch fire, but they explode, and the projectile, and the little cells, the many little cells that are part of that battery, they projectile out, causing tiny fires everywhere in a home or a business. And that's why we're here today. That's why we're looking at legislation like this today. That's why I thank my colleagues for putting so much work in for this type of legislation, and why I'm a proud co-sponsor of introduction number 663, because we do have to grow, we do have to learn, and we'll do it together. And whether we have to make these bills different, better, tighter before we vote on them, we will. But the main focus is to make sure that the residents of this city and the people who are in business in this city and the people who want to do business in this city are safe. So I want to thank you for all the work you've done thus far. Fire Department, Consumer Affairs and Worker Protection, and my colleagues for this legislation. So we're finished with this portion. I'm going to ask our counsel, Josh Kingsley, to end this portion, and we'll head into public testimony.
Great, thank you, Chair. You all are dismissed.
Thank you, Chair.
We're going to now turn to the public testimony section of the hearing. We're going to start with George Farinacci. He is on Zoom, and he represents the Uniformed Firefighter Officers Association. After him, we will go to Hilda Colon, who is from the De Liberistas organization, who is going to testify in person. So, George, you may begin when you have, once you're unmuted, sir.
Hello? Are we on?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi, I'm George Farinacci, Vice President of the UFOA Local 854. That's the fire officers. We seem to be saying a lot of the same things, which I think is good. The message is united. I want to thank the council for the attention to this critical safety issue. I want to thank the Chair Ariola for hosting it. Fires and deaths caused by the batteries in powered mobility devices have significantly increased over the past 2 years. Fires have nearly doubled, deaths have increased by 50%. 2022 is not over yet. As we come into the colder months, it's common to see a rise in fires as electric outlets begin to be strained by supplemental heating devices. We can expect this to be compounded by the increased electrical demand of powered mobility devices. Powered mobility devices are commonly stored for charging near the entrance of the home or the apartment. That means when the fire occurs, that fire will be between the occupants and their exit to safety. It will also be between the firefighters and the occupants. The intensity of these fires is so hot that at their fire last week, as one of the firefighters was going to close the door, the battery fire instantly burned through his bunker coat. That's gear made specifically to resist fire. It burned through immediately. It protected his skin, but the coat was very, very much damaged. The fire department is looking into it now to do a little study. New York State has become a right to repair state. We can anticipate an escalating incidence of fires due to the lack of education and understanding regarding the use of this equipment. Some contributing factors of these fires are batteries that are out of specifications, aftermarket batteries without the necessary quality assurance or testing, a lack of education regarding the use and compatibility of the batteries and devices, saving money on reused, repurposed batteries, and incompatible charging cords and power strips. Misuse and a lack of education regarding powered mobility devices present a serious life hazard and a serious safety hazard. I applaud the council's efforts to protect the citizens and firefighters in our great city. And I want to say thank you. And that's the end.
Thank you so much for your testimony, George.
Great, thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Hilda Colon. Hilda, you may come up.
Good morning. My name is Hilalín Colón Hernández, and I'm the Director of Policy and Strategic Partnerships for Los Televistas Unidos, which is the organization that represents more than 65,000 workers, app delivery workers, that deliver for Uber, DoorDash, Grubhub. Many of the workers that I represent utilize what we call the two-wheel micromobility equipment to actually perform this work. When I refer to two wheels, I'm meaning from e-bikes to scooters, because I know a lot of the conversation that happened was around e-bikes, but I just want to kind of like make sure that this is, as all of us agree, a very complicated problem. As for the last past years, we have been kind of like taking the initiative as the lack of government regulation and even guidance, right, to take it on our own, to educate our own workers about how to kind of like care for this equipment, what this equipment is about, what are the responsibilities that entail. And this is why we have hosted many bike tune-ups and mopeds, many in some of the people's and some of the elected officials' districts, actually educating workers, getting ahead of the game. And not only that, are also proposing innovative ways of how we can provide workers a safe way how to do this. And this is why we did the most recent announcement with the mayor and Senator Schumer to actually use the newsstand outside of City Hall to actually convert it into a Deliverista hub where people can do this charging safely, right? Because we don't want this to go underground economy. I think this is what the issue right now it is. From our point of view, I think the legislation in terms of education, I think is a right step in the right direction. I think it has to be tailored because as you've seen, there's thousands of manufacturers actually and different equipment. So we don't have a fit for all kind of like solution in terms of education. On the legislation about the fire department, I think it's a great idea. This is where it should start. I appreciate that the fire department is doing demonstration. I think that's what they should do. They should try these batteries and also find solutions. We have done in our research that there are safety boxes that people can probably use in their homes to actually protect what the battery is being charged. But we just need the resources of the fire department to prove it that is what is accurate. In regards to the legislation, and I know Councilmember Feliz and Gail, in principle, we're in agreement, but also what we worry in some of this kind of like bills that are presented, especially for the secondhand, is that nobody today can identify what the secondhand equipment is, right? If I can put you two batteries in front of you, you will not even be able to tell me. And actually, we did the presentation to highlight that. And not to shame anybody, it's like this is how the complicated issues, how are we gonna put that in forward on it? And one of the biggest fears that we have is to make sure that the person in possession will be the worker. We cannot go back to the days where workers were getting arrested for actually utilizing an e-bike because you passed a legislation to actually make that legal. So we just want to highlight that. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
Sure.
So one question I have, and thank you for all your work on this issue and your intuition, and also for the demonstration in Brooklyn. That was very helpful. But the issue is, I know you also talked about how some of the either federal agencies could be helpful or regulations of stores and manufacturers. How, in your mind, would that work? Because we're all trying to figure this out. And I just was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. So what we have said is like, and I appreciate that you raised that, what we have said, this is coming through our reports. Federal government is saying, yes, it's okay to bring it in, right? And that is the challenge that we have because in New York, we are seeing that it's not safe to bring it in, right? I think what we need is a clear guidelines about, and I don't like the whole regulation of the whole industry because there is faulty could be at the manufacturing level. There could be at the distribution. Maybe didn't comply or didn't do what they're supposed to. The stores are key on it, right? Because the stores are selling. I will tell you, many deliveristas go to the stores. Even the store owners will give them even the manufacturer. They will not even give them a box. They will take it out of the box and give it to them. When they even ask for it, they will not even provide it. And the thing is that I will tell you, I have had workers go into a clothing store and buy one of this equipment. I have had workers that go in a computer store and buy this equipment. We need to know who is selling this. Remember, the equipment that we're talking about, until a couple of years ago, people are buying even this for their kids, scooters, skateboards, right? We don't know who's selling. So the first thing to approach in order to put common sense legislation is have a license because that person, if the assumption is, right, two things. If you're selling the device or you even charging the device, fire department clearly said that they have to basic modifications that they have to comply, and that's not happening. I will tell you, charging, it's happening. Today, it was interesting. They're supposed to have certain regulations. I have been in locations, parking stations, bodegas, basements, you name it, where this is taking place. And that is the part that we need to get out there who's doing this. So then we can regulate. But right now, the approach, we're going after the target of the user that because we can see it. And that is the part that we would try to kind of like bring to this table to see how, and we're willing to sit at the table, even kind of like put some ideas that we have come up.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Nora McCauley, followed by Baruch Hertzfeld. Yeah, you can both go up together, whichever. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Is mine on? Yeah. All right. Okay. Thank you. I wanted to applaud the council and the fire department, although they left, for their efforts on this. It's a really important issue. I work at Propel Electric Bikes, which is in Brooklyn in the Navy Yard, and we only sell bikes that have that use the Bosch e-bike system, which is Underwriter Laboratories approved. But it is the only system that's available that's UL approved. There's only one. So when people come in, I spend a lot of time explaining to people why the bicycles that we sell cost twice as much, at least, as some of the bikes that they would get anywhere else. And it's partly because there's really no competition for UL-listed e-bike systems. So the Bosch system is great. It's safe. Because it's UL-listed, you can plug it in your home. You won't burn down your home or your neighbors. And this is what I also explain to potential customers is, sorry, I'm nervous, that the UL listing, Underwriter Laboratories listing, was started 100 years ago, and the testing was started 100 years ago when people started making electric appliances that would get plugged into your home. So this is toasters, this is irons, things that were drawing a lot of current were burning down people's homes. So the insurance industry got behind creating this certification program so that they didn't constantly have to pay for people's homes to get burned down. And of course, nobody wants anybody's home to get burned down ever anyway. But essentially, the responsibility was pushed onto the manufacturers. So it's very hard in this country now to sell an iron or a toaster that's not actually UL listed. Why is it possible to sell these mobility devices that are not UL listed? The responsibility needs to be pushed back on the manufacturers just so much, because I just can't, like, we at Propel, we say it's like selling selling a car without seat belts. To sell a bike that's gonna burn down somebody's home. I get very upset about this. But at the same time, we're also charging so much for these bikes. So I have two possible solutions that I would like to bring up, in addition to everything being UL listed. And one is outdoor charging, because in China, where a lot of these extra other batteries that aren't UL listed are getting made, a lot of people are actually charging their batteries in big docks outside. So that would be amazing if that could happen. And the second thing is, in Denver, they have rebates for people who buy e-bikes, but you have a special program where you can only get the rebate if you buy a certain bike. And so that would help in so many ways, because it would bring the price down for the more expensive, safer bikes. And at the same time, it would also provide education, because people, in order to get the rebate, would have to understand the dangers that they're bringing into themselves, into their families, into their homes. So, thank you. That's it.
Any questions?
Yeah, no?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the testimony. 3 questions. The first one is, how much does the highest quality battery that you use, UL certified, how much does it cost generally?
If you were to buy the battery by itself, it would be $800 to $1,000 for that one battery. It's an entire system as well. But the other thing is that they're also warrantied. So if there is any damage to a Bosch battery, we can return it to the manufacturer, and they will replace it for that customer. So there's, because it is part of this system, there's a warranty in place as well, which I think is well worth it.
And how much are the non-certified batteries?
I have no idea, right? We don't, like, we won't even touch the bikes to work on them for a number of reasons, but one is insurance and safety. If you have that bike in the shop, then you have the insurance goes way up for the store itself. And the second thing is often the parts and the workmanship are not, like, it gives my mechanics, it gives them actual, like, agitas, right? Like, they don't want to touch it. Like, it's not safe.
And how many hours do UL batteries usually last before they run out of charge? I know it depends on how fast you're going, but
Sure.
generally.
They're guaranteed, right? The Bosch batteries are guaranteed for a minimum of 500 charge cycles, which is 3 years-ish, depending.
And how long can it run for before it runs out of charge? Like, let's say one long use, 5 hours?
We usually say miles, so probably, I mean, most of the batteries that we sell would be like between 30 and 60 miles. A lot of our customers have bikes with 2 batteries, or you can have an extra battery that you switch out. Yeah, so 60 miles would be about right, 40 to 60.
Thank you. Last question. You mentioned you only use UL certified batteries. Do you have any, or do you see any potential issues with other nationally recognized testing laboratories, or just use it because that's the gold
I think that we
standard?
would probably have a bit of a wait and see approach. There's a lot of good systems, good batteries, good motors that are very close. And I think that, like for instance, they've had like European certification, or in one case, they've actually even had a Chinese certification. But we would probably actually talk to FDNY to get their green light.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Councilmember Brewer?
Thank you. So I was just wondering, how many people are you working with who are delivering, and you know, how are they able to afford your batteries? Because we also hear, you know, that people can't afford them. So how many people are you working with? Do you have any sense of?
We have very few people using our bikes for deliveries. Very few.
Very few.
Because the cheapest bike we sell is $3,000. Without a rebate, that's not really going to work.
So because the battery and the bike have to go together, obviously, right? So do you think that maybe some solution might be to have the companies that are doing, you know, DoorDash, et cetera, help with some of this financing? Because it really is a cost issue. That's what we're dealing with.
We have financing, but honestly, like the kind of financing we use, you actually do have to have a credit score to get. And so I'm sure that's a huge problem for a lot of people who are essentially unbanked or operating in cash or all these kinds of other things. So yes, it would be great. And we do actually sell a lot of bikes to the companies that the sort of, what are the companies that then provide them to Whole Foods. So if you see the bikes, particularly in Manhattan, they're little bikes that are pulling
I
around.
see them every inch of my neighborhood.
So they're pulling around big trailers.
Yep.
So
those are your bikes?
Yeah, we do sell that. We do sell those.
And those are going to Whole Food that are then going to their workers, is what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah, well, and so the point is that wherever they're being charged, they're safe.
Right.
So I don't think the workers are taking them home. I think they pick them up at a point, at a sort of a
They can charge them at the stores in some cases, outside.
Yeah, and
I
then
see
they
the
also go
charging
back to
station.
the sort of the central place where they pick up the equipment for the day.
All right. That's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So just a couple of questions.
Sure.
You mentioned that you use the Bosch batteries. So those are certified, obviously, and were they involved in any of these fires that?
No.
Oh, none.
No, so that's the thing.
Right.
Like, they are certified, guaranteed, warranted. If you suspect damage, bring it back. We'll send it back to Germany for you, and they'll send you a new one.
And is that part of what you mean when you're talking about the UL certified system? Or could
No,
you
so
further explain that?
UL is a certification system that was developed in the United States by the insurance companies. But it's an independent identity now, and they test products extensively in order to give them sort of a certification of safety. So Bosch, the e-bike system, has taken the time and investment to have their system UL listed, but they're the only one. They're the only one, which is
All right.
crazy.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Editorial
I
version.
appreciate your testimony. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Great, thank you. You may go ahead, sir.
Can you hear me now? Okay, so my name is Baruch Hertzfeld. I've been a bicycle advocate for many years. I've been, I started a bike program for, probably the first bike sharing program in the city maybe 10 to 15 years ago, I tried to get Hasidim on bicycles because there was tension over bike lanes. So I was always involved in bikes that way. I have 4 kids. I transport them only on an e-bike. I have triplets. The only way to really move kids around the city is via an e-bike because you can't take them on the bus, you can't take them on the subway, you can't put them in a car. The only way to move them around is on an e-bike. Okay, so during COVID, I was helping a lot of seniors who did not have any. I would bring them food and meals, and I realized that there's a need to get seniors on mobility scooters and to get around. So I started a company to get more seniors on mobility scooters and create sort of like a Revel for seniors so that they can go everywhere and they wouldn't be limited. It was a real challenge with Accessoride during COVID. There was the subways aren't planned to be accessible for the next 30 years. So I figured a network of mobility scooters that could transport seniors everywhere would be very, very useful for the city. But then I started realizing the dangers of batteries, because I started putting seniors on scooters and they kept on running out of battery, and I realized that I couldn't really, in good faith, put batteries in people's houses who are mobility challenged and have them charged because they're not able to get downstairs, they're not able to do anything. So I started to look into what are the so like a year ago, I started really digging into what are the challenges on battery safety and how can we figure out how to create a safe charging system in the city. Because I can't have a fire inside of a senior's location. I realized that in Taiwan and in India, they're using something called a battery swap system. So people don't own their own batteries in those countries because what they do is they join a subscription service, and in this subscription service, they get a battery from the company, and then they can change it out all over the city. People don't have to charge the batteries inside their houses, and they could and there's no limitation. One of the reasons why there are these giant fires is because the batteries themselves are usually much bigger. This is not the batteries that delivery guys use are usually double the size of this. Is because the woman who spoke before said that she was comfortable with a 30 to 60 mile range and a 500 cycle. The riders are doing around 100 miles a day, and they're doing 20 miles before they even start work. They're coming, and 500 cycles doesn't last them in a year. So a $1,200 battery or that she's talking about won't last them a year. Then they go through 2, and they can't have it limited. So they need, one of the reasons why people need whether these giant fires because the batteries themselves have to be so big, and they're keeping 2 of them in an apartment. Okay, that's my time. I have a lot to add. I've been researching this for a very long time.
Yeah. If anyone has any questions? No.
Okay.
Okay, and if you have any additional testimony that would further describe the battery swap system or, your ideas on lithium, since you've done so much extensive work, we'd be happy to accept that.
Okay, so I should just provide the testimony, and I'll
in writing?
Yes.
And we'll be happy to accept that.
Okay, thank you.
And add that information in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, written testimony could be submitted at testimony@council.nyc.gov. Next, we'll hear from Walton Wilson. And then followed by Mr. Wilson, we'll hear from Dolores Solomon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Councilwoman Ariola and other members of the City Council. I made an extreme effort to get here because I am a senior and I'm a community activist for the last 40 years in my neighborhood. I love to get around. Unfortunately, I'm limited by the scooter, how fast it goes, how long the battery charges. I ran into Mr. Baruch and he helped me out. I live on a second floor walk-up. I have very small opportunity to charge my scooter. I leave it in front of the door, and it's just one problem after another. But I like the idea of using a scooter which has a lithium battery. It gives me more range. I can get around. But the concern is if I have to charge in my apartment, I don't like that because potential fires. And if there's a fire, I'm the last one going to be getting out because, as you could see, I'm disabled. So therefore, we recently, we went to our city council person, Shai Osi, and we petitioned and says, well, maybe we could get somebody to do a battery swap in the council area and see what happens. Not only for seniors, but perhaps for anyone who has this similar battery. I would love that because then I eliminate the idea of having to charge in my apartment, and the safety is very important to me. In addition to that, we looked at another angle. Seniors will kind of hold up in apartments. If we have the ability to get out to the park, let's say, we can also contribute to a senior an exchange between young people and seniors in terms of anti-violence. Because wherever I go, I talk to young people, and you know that's like a mentoring type situation, which would be good because like violence is another problem I'm concerned about. So we could kill two birds with one stone. Not only are you going to help with a good battery, but seniors be able to get out a lot more often, which I know I get out, but it's an extra effort. But with the help of the good battery, it's not a big problem because I can move around all the neighborhood. One thing was not mentioned here. They talked about community, planning board. Well, I also belong to the precinct council. That's another area where a lot of people are connected, and we should make an input into there. I'm going to the precinct committee tonight, and I'm going to mention what had happened here. But overall, I'm here to support all the intros. I believe anything with safety of the battery, I want to support. And as I educate myself, I'm going to pass it on throughout my community. Thank you, and I also want to commend Mr. Baruch for his suggestion to try to alleviate, some of the problems for seniors alone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Next, we'll hear from Dolores Solomon, followed by Mr. Butler, who is on Zoom. So, Dolores, you may go ahead.
Good morning, council members. My name is Dolores Solomon, and I'm just here to advocate about safer charging procedures. And I also am a friend and a senior of Baruch, Mr. Baruch Herschel, and he's been a blessing in my life. I also do Uber Eats and DoorDash at 65 years old because I'm one of those seniors that like to get around. So I use a mobility scooter, and sometimes I have major issues with the batteries. I've had a battery explode on me on the outside, not even by charging, just by going over bad gaps in the streets. But by the grace of God, there was no injury to myself, only the battery. But I'm just here to advocate where the city can do more, and the battery swapping network vision is a great one because they do it in other countries, and I feel it might be very cost effective because I live on a fixed income and I can't be paying $1,000 for a battery. I'm just on Social Security and the little bit of hours that I work with DoorDash and Uber. So I'm just here to be a part of a vision that it'll be safer for myself and many others. And basically, that's all I have to say.
Oh, thank you all both very much. I think it's great that this battery opportunity for seniors exists, and I think that's fantastic. Then they would stop, if all of the seniors were doing what you're doing, they might stop bugging me about the bikes, because they don't like the bikes. Right? But my question is, how do you charge now? Obviously, you're nervous about doing it in your apartment, we all are. But, and I assume you'd love to have more charging stations too in your neighborhood, so that would help.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how you charge now, how much do you pay for the batteries now? And would you like to have charging stations? Would that be of assistance?
From you directing it to me or him?
Both of you.
Okay.
When I first started using a scooter, I know of a Citibank that has an outlet in the lobby. I've used that. I have certain people, certain stores I could go in and pay them a few dollars to charge. And eventually, I live in a small co-op. At that time, the board, I petitioned the board to put an outlet in front of the building. The old co-op board turned me down, but the new co-op board I have, they allow me to do that. And that's my savior. But I say that's just a limited, limited solution for me. I'd rather not even, I don't plug a lithium battery in there, but I have, Mr. Brew made it possible to be using a lithium battery, but I'm concerned about even plugging it into an outlet at the building because, again, this could be a potential fire. But I'm making it, but I'm more approved of the battery swap where I could bring a used battery that's not lost its charge and just swap it. That to me is a better solution than what I'm doing now.
Okay, for myself, yeah, I think the battery swapping network would be a good solution. I myself use a long extension cord from my third floor apartment down to where my bike is to charge. But sometimes I'm tired and I wake up and my battery's gone.
Ooh.
And that's costly to me, but thank you for Mr. Baruch. He have replaced one or two of them, But basically, this is a big city with a lot of people, and a lot of people do the essential work as delivering as myself. It's fun to me, and I get around and I feel a part of something now. I used to be a carpenter at one time in my life until my mobility accident in 2008. So now I feel more of a part of society now, being able to do what I do.
Thank you very much. My neighbor does the cord thing, and it gets everybody nervous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you both so much for your testimony.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
Next, we'd like to invite Ronald Butler, who is on Zoom, to testify, followed by Nicholas Probst. Ronald, when you're unmuted, you may begin.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon. I hope I can be heard loudly and clearly.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Excellent. My name is Ron Butler. I represent Energy Storage Safety Products International in very cold Detroit, Michigan. It's very cold right now. I'd like to thank the council for inviting me to offer this prepared statement on this extremely important topic. My company has been honored by the United States Department of Transportation through funding on multi-year research grants that seek to complete research into and develop solutions for the safe transport, storage, and charging of lithium-ion batteries. As an outcome of the project, we are moving into prototyping specialized systems for safe e-mobility, battery charging, and battery transport and storage. We fully support and applaud the proposed initiatives found in today's council oversight agenda. We also recognize the challenges that will be faced when attempting to enforce a couple of the agenda items. As a retired Detroit firefighter, I can speak to the challenges that this may add to an already full FDNY plate. Lastly, we stand ready to support the City of New York as you complete and refine this extremely important work. We would, however, encourage consideration of additional language that calls for requirements that include the ability for physical separation of batteries from commodities for charging. An example would be removable batteries for e-bikes and scooters always keeping in mind that this is a battery problem and not necessarily an e-mobility one. We would also encourage any language that calls for batteries to be charged and stored in approved container devices, such as lockers and storage devices that are fully enclosed, contain active fire suppression components, can communicate failures to interested third parties, such as building owners or the fire department, and maybe most importantly, can control pressure increases and toxic gases and then burn byproducts to the outside environment. Our research for the United States Department of Transportation, as well as work with the National Fire Protection Association, Underwriters Laboratories, and most recently, the National Bicycle Dealers Association, has shown us that charging and storage safety is better ensured with the application of this type of systematic approach. There may be a way for the City of New York to cooperate with the U.S. Department of Transportation on this project. Lastly, we would suggest that in order to encourage buy-in from all New York citizens, formal, quote, voice of the customer activities, unquote, would be held to ensure that those who would be most affected by these agenda items are fully engaged in the process and have the opportunity to offer input into the design and development of safe charging and storage infrastructure. Lastly, just as a bit of an aside, if I can add this, I attended the recent lithium-ion battery symposium presented by FDNY Foundation and Fire Department New York. I was absolutely blown away by the preparedness and professionalism of the FDNY, their openness to both teach and learn more about the battery safety subject matter.
We
I'm sure
appreciate,
you're
sir.
extremely proud of your fire department. If I could, very
If you can
briefly,
wrap
I
up
wanna
in
push
about 30
back
seconds, I'll
just a
be
bit.
happy to hear you.
I'm sorry?
Can you wrap up in about 30 seconds? Otherwise, we'll ask you to submit written.
I'm just about done.
Perfect, thank
If
you.
I could push back just a tiny bit on the idea that any listing of any form provides a safety panacea, I would. The data shows us, and we burn batteries all the time, that all batteries can fail, with some more open to failure than others. This is an issue of intrinsically safe versus safer, and I am very glad that I've heard over and over again from participants the use of the term safer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and if I could just ask you to submit your written testimony, because your testimony was very compelling. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Sorry, we'll go to Nicholas Probst on Zoom, followed by Antonio Molina, who's present, I believe, and then Shaquane Mitchell, who's also present. So Nicholas on Zoom, you may begin once I unmute you.
Excellent. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Nico Probst, and I'm the head of government affairs at Getir, a global leader in grocery delivery. And I want to thank everyone on the committee for the attention on this important topic, and to Councilwoman Brewer and her office for engaging with us on it over the course of the past couple months. Getir is the pioneer of grocery delivery, beginning our operations in Istanbul, Turkey, nearly 7 years ago. We've grown to serve several cities across Europe and launched our operations in New York nearly a year ago, and we operate in over 15 stores throughout New York City with a workforce of about 500 employees, which also includes our delivery riders as well. Getir primarily conducts our grocery deliveries on e-bikes and e-mopeds powered by lithium-ion batteries. We do this intentionally because it allows us to avoid the use of combustible engine vehicles, which reduces the noise and traffic congestion around our stores and allows us to do our part in transitioning to a cleaner, more sustainable delivery operations. Adopting this model and the use of lithium batteries has led us down a pretty comprehensive path to create safe internal battery storage guidelines and protocols for each of our stores, and we've had 0 incidents of battery-related issues since our launch in New York. Getir, importantly, owns all of our e-bikes ridden by our delivery riders, and we ensure our e-bikes are utilizing industry-certified e-bike batteries. As recommended by manufacturers in our stores where our batteries are stored, they are intentionally spaced apart with a maximum battery count of 3 per shelf. Our charging batteries are kept separate from the batteries that are currently charged, and every one of our stores has fire-resistant insulation installed around the walls of where our metal shelving and smoke detectors are located near each rack. Additionally, we've also installed drop pads underneath our storage racks to prevent damage in case a battery were to be dropped. And we also provide each store with a dunk tank filled with water so that if a battery begins to malfunction and experience a thermal runaway event, we can safely dispose of it in the tank. Batteries are never allowed to be charged overnight or whenever no one is present in the store, and we never store damaged batteries on site. Our stores all have clearly defined guidelines when it comes to safe handling, storage, and maintenance of these batteries. Our employees are also trained on how to spot a battery that might be damaged, malfunction, or defective, and appropriate steps are taken to ensure it's disposed of safely and properly. In the event that a thermal runaway event would occur, our stores are also trained on safety and evacuation procedures. We recognize, though, that e-bikes and their battery technology have emerged into our city streets as a delivery method relatively quickly, and that's clearly because of their convenience, cost efficiency, and their ability to serve as an important alternative to gas-guzzling trucks as a method of moving commerce throughout our cities. But given the relative quick emergence, we absolutely support a robust public education campaign that will go far in addressing the information gaps that currently exist around battery storage. Educating residents and riders on responsible battery handling, how to spot the warning signs of damaged batteries, and what to do with damaged batteries are all vital pieces of information that are needed when owning and using one of these
Time
vehicles.
expired.
Excellent. I can submit the remaining portions of my testimony.
Great, thank you so much. Next, we hear from Antonio Molina and Shaquane Mitchell. Are they either of you all present here in the chambers? Molina and Mitchell. Okay, if you're here, great. Next, we'll move to another member of the public online. We will hear from Melinda Hanson, followed by Lyric Thompson. Melinda, are you available?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Excellent. Good morning. My name is Melinda Hanson. I'm a Brooklyn-based consultant specializing in e-bikes internationally. I'm also a co-founder of the Equitable Commute Project, a program that connects lower-income New Yorkers with quality e-bikes and accessible financing. The recent battery fires are devastating. Every New Yorker deserves to feel safe in their home, and we must take action to ensure that they do. But as has been well covered today, the problem is not e-bikes in general, but rather uncertified, damaged, mismatched, or tampered with lithium-ion batteries. E-bikes are a global phenomenon, and that's a good thing. They're outselling electric cars by a wide margin. Globally, they're reducing 10 times as many barrels of oil per day than electric cars. They're extremely convenient and more cost-effective than transit. And crucially, they're essential to the livelihoods of our city's delivery workers. New York can learn a lot about e-bike safety from global cities. For example, Germans bought 2 million e-bikes in 2021 alone, and yet it's rare to hear about an e-bike battery fire in Berlin. So how are they achieving this? E-bikes sold in Germany meet exacting standards that ensure that they are street legal and that their batteries are certified safe. Clear definitions and enforcing existing laws is essential. Photos of New York's fires appear to show off-brand e-mopeds and other miscellaneous devices that don't actually meet the legal definition of e-bikes. New York State has a definition of street legal e-bikes, and these regulations should be enforced. As we advance this conversation, it's important that stakeholders stop using e-bikes as a catch-all term and focus first on restricting the sale and use of off-brand devices that are not even street legal. I very much support the City Council's bill to ban the use of uncertified batteries, but an equitable transition also requires carrots in addition to sticks. For that reason, I encourage this council to follow Denver, Colorado's lead and consider a subsidy to support the purchase of high-quality e-bikes as we phase out the lower-cost devices, especially for our city's delivery workers. I also support the proposed education campaigns, but critically, these campaigns must strike the right tone so as not to stoke fears that all micromobility vehicles are dangerous. Indeed, a UL-certified e-bike is roughly as safe as the iPhone in your pocket. Education campaigns should instead focus on promoting practical solutions, including trading in damaged batteries, only using the power cord that came with the device, and using inexpensive wall timers that plug into the wall and provide an extra layer of protection to prevent dangerous overcharging. I think that's about my time, so I will leave it there, but I thank you all very much for your time and thoughtful consideration of this matter.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Oh, I'm sorry, there is one question from Councilmember Feliz.
Thank you so much for all the information. Can you elaborate on that last point related to dangerous overcharging? Did you get the audio?
Yes, sorry, I was muted again. So a lot of the challenge with the dangerous overcharging is if a battery is damaged and you leave it in to overcharge, it can enter an unstable state. So a lot of folks recommend using a wall timer, which essentially ensures that your battery stops trying to take a charge once it's reached capacity, and that can greatly reduce the chances of an actual fire.
Are there any batteries that currently have that wall timer, or is that something that people generally purchase separately?
So higher quality e-bikes, like the one sold at Propel, that woman, I didn't catch her name, testified a little bit earlier, those have battery management systems embedded within the vehicle itself that helps to prevent overcharging. So this is a separate device that you can purchase and plug in and then plug your own battery into it. And really just as an anecdotal story here, I have a friend of mine who is a battery engineer who said that she would leave her e-bike charging in her child's room if it was plugged into one of these. Of course, she has a quality e-bike, but these things do really, really help to ensure and make things safer.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we'll hear from Lyric Thompson. And if there's anyone else present who would like to testify, please make yourself known. And Lyric, you may go ahead. Unmute in just a second, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Good afternoon, City Council. My name is Lyric Thompson. I would like to speak on fire safety. Eon batteries are terrifying, and the fires that they produce are terrifying. But what's more frightening to me, or which adds to the fear for me, is the fact that a lot of these buildings, which you're seeing these horrible fires in, have a lot of violations in them. Violations that would aid in fire safety, such as the violations for non-code compliant doors in hallways, apartment entrances, and building entrances. Now, the Twin Parks fire happened a year ago, and for the past year, I have begged and groveled with this city council to address this issue, in part because of our own issues with a lack of code compliant doors. Through this process, I have learned that HPD doesn't even train their inspectors in these codes, these fire standards, which not only keep tenants safe by preventing the spread of smoke and fire, but also keep our first responders safe. So I have a question that has been posed to me, and now I'd like to pose it to the City Council. How is a housing inspection agency supposed to enforce a standard they have not been trained in? That is a question that begs an answer. Now, from this council, from David Carr, Councilmember Carr's office, I've been told it's not his job to have oversight with fire safety or housing. He's on both committees, and I would argue that it is exactly your job. But it's not lost on me that Joe Borelli said the same thing. The result of his lack of oversight was 17 people dying of smoke inhalation as they fled for their lives in the Twin Park fire. Now, I don't mean to be ugly, ladies and gentlemen, but I don't wish to lose another New Yorker on the altar of the hubris of this city council and those who think it's not their job to address or have oversight over housing agencies that are supposed to enforce these codes. Councilmember Feliz, I begged you to address this issue, and all you did was write a copy and paste of the self-closing definition, slap it on the ass, and pass it through like you did something. A year later, I had to go to the New York Times in order to get the proper violations written on my doors. That should embarrass this city council, and that should be very telling to the city council that after a year of begging, groveling, emailing, calling, and even you, Chair Ariel, your office told me you would do something. You would call the fire department, email the fire department, write the fire
Time
department.
expired.
And your response was to ghost me and then block me on social media, which, by the way, is a violation of my First Amendment right. I'm going to ask that you address that before I have to take you to court and address it. So my question for this council is, what are you doing to address this issue? Or does it become my job as a citizen to take the city to court to force this housing agency to do what most people consider elementary, which is just train? Is there an answer from the council?
As you mentioned, we do have a lot of legislation that's in, a lot of legislation that has passed. HPD is currently training their inspectors, as are the fire department and the Department of Buildings, and we do thank you for your testimony.
That's what you call gaslighting, council member, and it's not acceptable. Is that it?
Thank you so much, ma'am. If anyone else is present here that would like to testify, please make yourself known. Seeing no one else, I'll turn back to Chair Ariola to close off this hearing. Thank you so much.
I'd like to thank everyone who came today to testify.
Oh, sorry, we have someone else. Sorry, Justin, I see you there, sir.
Hello?
Yeah, sorry, we see you. Go ahead, sir.
Hi. No, I was recently a victim of the 52nd Street fire. I was the one holding the two girls out the window to try to help save their lives. If you saw the videos of it, and I found out quickly after that from the fire inspector that there was a fire in that same location 6 months prior, and there was not one iota of fire safety measures, not a fire alarm in the entire building went off. It was all word of mouth. There was absolutely no sprinkler system. There was no carbon monoxide. And with these lithium-ion batteries, I know for a fact, before they're designed to let off carbon monoxide before they spark a fire. So any kind of carbon monoxide detection would give early warning to people to get out and start prevention. Never mind the fire alarm and any kind of fire alarm in the entire building or announcement. There was nothing like that. And then when the fire department came up to the floor to try to save me, the water wasn't even turned on for them to use. They had to go get it from the truck. And while my back and my arm was boiling and burning me alive, and I was literally thinking about committing suicide because of the pain. And then 6 months ago, this location had the same exact happen, and nobody did nothing to prevent that. And that's on. I don't know who that's on, but I'm here to testify that I'm not going to let that go.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
You guys should really, really, really do something.
I'd like to thank everyone who came out today. I'd like to thank the members of the committee and also the sponsors of this life-saving legislation that is being put forth today, and everyone who testified and gave information that will certainly be taken into consideration, and we appreciate it. I'd also like to thank our counsel, Josh Kingsley, our analyst, William Hongash, and my chief of staff, Phyllis Cirillo, for helping move this committee forward. Thank you so much.